Suspiria. Okay, that's what I am doing. Suspiria, an Italian film by Dario Argento. I don't know why I'm so animated right now. Suspiria came out in 1977. It's a horror film. Some have said it's a giallo film, which is a new genre I'm unfamiliar with, like very violent, overly violent Italian sort of murder mystery sort of thrillers. Quite a mouthful. But then others have said, no, it's not a giallo because it has these supernatural elements and stuff. I don't know. But anyways, this is a very classic movie, and you've probably seen it before. If you have, let me know. And this is another one that I haven't seen. And not only have I not seen it, I have never heard of it. I know because now that I've seen it and I'm kind of really interested in learning about it, it's very iconic. It's very interesting to me, as big a horror fan as I am, and all these movies I've seen, there are some very iconic horror movies that I have never even heard of. I can't believe I've never heard of this because it's so totally for me. And that's the best way I would describe this movie overall, is that it is totally for me. It is just it checks all the boxes. Remember when I did my podcast episode on A Nightmare on Elm Street, how I said I love this movie so much because it checks the boxes for what I want in a horror film. And that's good enough for me, and that makes me feel warm and fuzzy on the inside. Kind of weird with a horror movie, but us horror hounds kind of understand the feeling, and Suspiria is a film that hits that perfectly. It is so much. I mean, now don't get me wrong. I'm not comparing it to A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's a very different style of film, but it is just one of those movies. And it's not always horror movies, of course. I have other films. My favorite movie of all time is Dances with Wolves. Not even remotely a horror movie, although in some ways it is a horror movie. Some of the terrible things that happen in it, but yeah, they're just these movies that are just, I see them and like my eyes light up, and that doesn't happen a lot. And that's something that I've kind of talked about before on here, where admittedly it is part of my own fault because I'm very cynical and well, I'm kind of a go with the flow, down to earth kind of guy, but I also have this strange cynical side to me and very critical side. I've always been that way, though. I can't really help it. It's just who I am as a person. And that kind of really goes into movies. I'm very, very critical of films. Um, I have this weird thing where I'm able to forgive lots of faults of horror movies because that's what I find most of my enjoyment in. That's not a unique thing. We all have that, a lot of horror fans. But then when it comes to other movies, like for instance, like movies that I can tell have like a lot of good creative minds behind them, then that's when I get extremely critical. Um, yeah, I don't know where I was really going with that, but I thought I would mention that. But yeah, Suspiria is so good. It was so fantastic. So I was, as you know, I've been doing Nightmare on Elm Street, and I did the whole series for you guys. I hope you really enjoyed that. That was absolutely a blast for me to do and talk about. And we had one more really to do, which was Freddy versus Jason, which I will do a podcast episode on as well. I'm not rushing to do it, but I will do it. My friend, as I said, we've been watching all these movies together. He had actually never seen Freddy versus Jason, so we watched that one together. And that one's fun. I will say that for sure. That's not a great movie. It's not like good. It's got tons of plot holes and goofiness in it, but it's fun. I mean, they kick the shit out of each other in that movie. It's a lot of fun to watch. It's super gory. Yeah, I don't really have a problem with that movie. I like it. And then afterwards, we were kind of like we were gonna watch Freddy's Nightmares, the television show, because that Blu-ray box set that came out a couple years ago, which my friend has an extra disc of special features, and they put like 2 or 3 episodes of that TV show on it. So we were gonna watch that, but then he forgot to bring the disc over. So we said, well, what else will we watch? Let's watch another movie. Let's do a double feature. And he had all his movies with him, and he said, well, what about this one? And he pulled out this Suspiria Steelbook. And I said, "Oh, never heard of it." And he goes, "Oh, it's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. You're gonna love it. It's weird and trippy, and it has a unforgettable score." And I thought, okay, I'm intrigued. But then what I was mostly intrigued with was the Steelbook. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the poster of Suspiria and the cover art and all that, but the Steelbook had this like just weird thing on it. I don't know. look it up, but it was really, I just was like, okay, this is very intriguing to me. I have to see this. So we popped it in, and pretty much within like 1 minute of the movie starting, I was hooked. I was totally hooked. Now, one thing I got to say, and this is a preface to this whole podcast, and I will say I will jump around probably a little bit in this one. I know I did that with the new Nightmare episode as well. My past podcast episodes, I've kind of taken you through the plot and told you how I feel about each point. But this movie, as well as New Nightmare for me, was so trippy and like so all over the place, not necessarily in a bad way, that it was just easier for me to just talk about what I was feeling. I know it's a little hard to keep with sometimes, but that's how I'm doing it. So, um, right away though, I was like, "Whoa, this is awesome!" Because it just has this vibe to it that is like unlike many things. I wouldn't say it's unlike anything that's ever been made, but it's very unlike a lot of movies I've made. And this is kind of like my immediate thought, I'll give you at least with this film, was that it was like very David Lynchian. Now, obviously, Argento predates David Lynch. I'm not saying like, you know what I mean. But it definitely, I'm a huge David Lynch fan, so that just weird, trippy, dreamlike feel. Just you're like, I feel like I'm dreaming, but I'm not sure if I'm dreaming. That's the kind of feel that I get from a lot of Lynch's stuff. That feel was there. And then just coupled with the cinematography and the colors, and I will get to all of that. But that was my immediate sort of thoughts. The first thing that really kicked me into this movie was when she was in the airport, the main character, um, and Susie, that is, and she like walks through automatic sliding door out of the airport, and they had this close-up shot on the motor, and I kind of thought, why did they show that? I don't know if there was a reason for them showing that, but it's like it reminded me of David Lynch, where he just kind of occasionally shows you really weird close-up shots of things that other filmmakers wouldn't, and you're not even sure if there is a point for it. But the point is just to make you start to question the movie, I think. Start to like build, it's like a very, very slow and calculated burn of tension and dread. And that's when as soon as I saw that shot, I was like, oh, this movie's gonna be an ordeal. And then the shot when she was in the car and driving through the forest, which was dark forest at night in a rainstorm with these incredibly tall pines. Of course, again, that reminded me of Twin Peaks, but just that shot, like very otherworldly, very strange and foreign. Yeah, these movies I love. So the thing with this movie is, like I said, I have never seen it and I've never even heard of it, but of course it's an iconic film. So it's like, what do I say about this movie that hasn't been said already? Well, probably not a lot. Probably not a lot has been said about this movie that hasn't been said. It's been talked about to death and studied to death, and everybody and their mother has probably reviewed this movie on YouTube. But I will still give you my thoughts because I think that you guys enjoy them, and I'd like to talk about it, of course. So, one thing I will say before I start really getting into it is that you may notice my audio quality is not quite as good as it has been on the past ones. I apologize for that in advance. Unfortunately, I do have a headset with a microphone. I don't have a very good setup. I'm very low tech, low budget here. I don't have like a USB mic or anything. I've been using a headset with a mic on it, and it's been good enough, I think. Um, but that broke, unfortunately. The connector, whatever you plug it in, the jack, it's not broken off, but it's like it cuts in and out a lot, which sucks. Because I've only had it for like, I don't know, 8 months or something like that. But unfortunately, I don't have that. So I'm having to use my Bluetooth headphones with the built-in mic. So I'm sorry about that. I actually think, surprisingly, the microphone on these little headphones is pretty damn good for what it is. I know it's not great though, but please bear with that. I will try to rectify that in the future as I can. So I'm going to take a little quick break before I really dive into this movie. As always, it's going to be no time has passed for you, but if you'd like to use this time to like get a drink or some popcorn or whatever and relax with me and talk about this great movie, do so, and I will see you in about 2 seconds. Okay, so I am back talking about Suspiria. I'm going to say it that way every single time because I think it's funny. So the main thing with this movie, as I've said already, the tension and the dread and the atmosphere and everything is just so amazingly for me. But it is truly the feel of this movie that is what drew me into it. And I don't think that's a rare opinion, of course. But I think that with this movie, its merits are definitely not in its plot. And I think the plot is very simplistic. I think it's fine. I think the plot of this movie is fine, but it is simplistic. It is a little lax on the plot. It's a little bit predictable, and it's got a little bit of issues. But the other things of this movie, the lighting and the cinematography and the sound design and the mood, the atmosphere are so extremely well done that it doesn't really matter to me at least. I mean, I think a lot of other people would agree with that, but at least for me, the plot could have been even worse than it is, and I probably still would have liked it just as much. So, the basic plot of this movie is you have this character, Susie, who is played by Jessica Harper, and she's going to a ballet school. She's American. She's going to a ballet school in Germany, and the night that she gets there, in this rainstorm, she sees another student kind of like running out of the school through back into the woods, and then she tries to get in, and the person doesn't let her in. And then we kind of cut to the scene where the character, whose name is Pat, is going to her friend's apartment, is trying to tell her that something terrible is happening at this school, and that's when we get this really great first scene of her in the bathroom, of these like two piercing yellow eyes that like pull her out of the window and stab the shit out of her, and then throw her through the skylight. They hang her with like this cord and throw her through the skylight and kill her. And then her friend is like killed by being impaled by all these pieces of glass and stuff. And that was a pretty crazy way to start the movie. Now, one thing I will say is that these Italian horror films, I've been told, that tend to be very gory and violent. Now, I haven't actually seen a ton of Italian horror. I've seen very little actually, but that tends to be the case. Now, with this movie, I'd say that the special effects, in terms of gore, are pretty weak, actually. I mean, I'd say they're pretty weak. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing because, in some ways, I think it was almost stylistic. Now, of course, certain things I think are unintentionally weak, like, for instance, when her friend is being stabbed. Now, there's some to be said about that. When she's being stabbed, it does look very fake. It does look very much like they had a prop knife that goes in on itself, when they're stabbing her. And then randomly you see the killer stabbing the girl in her heart, and you're kind of like, what the fuck, when did he rip her chest open? It's very like visceral, and it kind of comes out of nowhere. You're like, oh shit, and he stabs her heart, and it looks super fake. So that might have been a little bit unintentional, but at the same time, because color is so important in this film, like the blood is so thick and extremely red. And I'd say that the blood color in this movie is even more saturated than the colors. This movie is famous for having the Technicolor process attached to it, the 3-strip format, and the colors are so extreme and so oversaturated and are almost a character in themselves in this movie. I think that's what this movie is most famous for. But I would argue that the blood is even more saturated than the colors in this movie. Like, it's verging on pink. It looks like paint. I think that was very intentional. That I think is cool. So while it doesn't look particularly real, I think that it's still very violent and very visceral the way that it was done, and that's where that you start to see that tension. I think the tension was established immediately in this movie, but this is another good scene that shows it, and it like boom, it's like this is going to be a visceral movie. I really do like when blood is played with color and stuff like that. There is another, there's tons of movies that don't just show like realistic looking blood. Another movie that does blood in a very interesting way is Vampires by John Carpenter, which came out in '98, which some of you have probably seen, with James Woods and one of the Baldwin brothers. I can't remember which one it was. That movie, the vampires bleed black blood. I just thought that was always such an amazing stylistic choice. And another thing that uses blood in a very interesting way is a video game, actually, that probably a lot of you are not familiar with. It's a Japanese video game called Danganronpa. It's a visual novel, which those are the kinds of games where there's not a ton of actual gameplay. You're mostly reading a story It's kind of they tend to be mysteries, murder mystery sort of stories where you're finding clues and you have input. You click on things and stuff like that, but it's like 95% reading the story. And in that game, it's like a murder mystery taking place in a school, and the blood is pink. Very interesting choice to have that because there is a lot of blood in that game, and the blood is pink. It's a very interesting stylistic choice that I always thought was a very cool choice. So that was another thing that immediately struck me was the blood. I don't see that talked about too much. I think it's kind of lumped in with the color, but I thought that was almost a separate thing. It was just I might be like looking a little bit too much into that, but it's just like a little weird niche thing that I thought was very interesting. So then we actually get into Susie coming to the school and actually getting in, and she starts to meet the cast of characters. She meets Miss Tanner, who is the German instructor of the school, very stern, Madame Blanc, who is the headmistress, and she meets a couple characters. She meets some of the girls in the locker room. She runs into Pavlos, who's the very weird, very strange looking sort of butler, if you will. And again, I apologize if you're annoyed by my comparisons to David Lynch, but I just love the guy so much. That was another thing that reminded me of David Lynch that I love. Just characters that look strange. They don't look so weird that they look deformed like hillbillies. Like they're not. It's not like hills have eyes, but they don't look normal. It's just putting you on edge ever so slightly because nobody quite looks the way that you are used to. I think that's a good way. And I think, again, that's a very, very calculated tension burn. This movie is slow paced, and I've talked about that before. Sometimes the pacing, slow burn pacing, can be a very big issue if you don't like the payoff. But this movie plays with the pacing a lot, and it plays into tension where you're always waiting, and this is the thing with horror movies is tension is one of the biggest cliches in horror films. And I think now we could do a whole podcast on my thoughts on modern horror films. I don't think they do them very well. I think because normally the payoff is some sort of jump scare or something. But in this movie, we don't really get that too much. The tension is just always so extremely well done and calculated. You're just gripping the edge of your damn chair, waiting to see what happens. You know something bad's going to happen. That's what makes tension great, and I think it's just done so well in this movie. It was very much a breath of fresh air to see. So, yeah, so Susie kind of meets her classmates and everything. One thing I thought was interesting, she meets one of her classmates, Olga, who was kind of bitchy. And that's one thing I will say, this movie was obviously an Italian film. Now, the lead character was American, and some of the other characters spoke English. But as far as I know, they didn't actually record they didn't use any of the dialogue, at least, that they recorded on set. Everything was dubbed. So that is one thing to keep in mind is that while the characters on screen, you can see their mouths moving, they are speaking English and they are saying the script. Everything is dubbed. So you just kind of have to let that go if you're going to enjoy this. It does look a little goofy at times with certain people who clearly don't speak English. It doesn't match up quite so well. Even the main character who speaks English, it doesn't always match up. It definitely sounds dubbed. But that's just how I guess they were doing those Italian films at the time. They were intended for American audiences, I think. So you kind of have to let that go. But she meets her friend Olga, who's kind of, like I said, kind of bitchy. And then she ends up, she has like a weird, like dizzy fit at one of the dance classes. And when she wakes up, she's kind of like back into one of the dorms. Olga threw her out of the apartment, and she's next to her friend, who becomes her friend Sarah, who's basically her neighbor in the dorm. And they kind of can't bring the doctor in, and they recommend she starts drinking wine with every meal and everything like that. And that was something that I don't know if I quite caught if they explained that or if it was just supposed to be, or if it's just a thing that happened. But I thought throughout this movie and afterwards that it was a bit strange how quickly she was removed from that situation with Olga. I didn't know because of course I'm spoiling everything, but like we're talking about this, but the gist of this movie is that they're all witches. All the main people that run the school are like a coven of witches. They gain their power off of the matriarch, who is this like super old witch, and that's basically what's going on. That's the mystery of the movie, so to speak. But it made me wonder, like, did Olga know something that she wasn't supposed to know, and that's why they removed her because they wanted to get at her, or was it that, like, I don't know. I wasn't sure. I thought it was very strange, but that's kind of what I was thinking, something like that. Um, there are a lot of things in this movie that aren't necessarily explained. Some things just kind of happen just to make you uncomfortable. Like a great example I thought was when after she has her dizzy spell, she's walking down the hallway and she sees the cook, who is just a very strange looking kind of woman with her son, who is like this little Dutch boy. Very weird. You're like, they don't look quite right, that kind of thing, and she sees like this kind of flash of light and stuff like that, and then it's kind of over, and you're kind of like, what the fuck was that? That's like a good example of just little weird scenes in this movie that don't really make much sense, and I don't know if they're supposed to all the time. I know that obviously some of them have relate to the plot, but I think that a lot of little things in this movie just kind of happen just to make you uncomfortable, to continually get you on edge, like I said. And if I could go on a little bit of a tangent, well, we've talked about before in other podcasts of mine that one of my favorite things is tension and dread. I consider them two different things. I've talked about this before. Tension, I feel to be that slow burn sort of feel where you kind of know something bad is going to happen as the viewer. The character knows something bad is probably going to happen, and they're using all of the filmmaking tricks to get you to, like I said, get on the edge of your seat and wait for that to happen. I love that, and it's done perfectly in the movie, like I said. But dread is different, I think, and dread is what I feel to be a much better, more effective sort of scare that I think this movie does to absolute perfection. It's my favorite thing. I've talked about it before. It's in certain movies. It's that kind of feeling, I think, where you feel like you are like helpless almost. It's a helpless sort of feeling, I think. It's this feel in films, and it's very difficult to describe, so please bear with me, but it's when movies feel dreamlike. It's when they feel nightmarish. It feels, like I said, where you're not quite sure if you're asleep or awake. You can't quite tell. You feel like you can't really trust anyone. Like everything is out of your control. It's just very weird, helpless, frightening feeling that pervades, I don't know if that's a word, through the movie. It's very pervasive throughout the film. I think it's most effective when it is just a constant feeling of being very uncomfortable. Everything feels foreign, and you feel like you're helpless. I've mentioned movies that do that. I think a great movie, I don't think it did it as quite as well as this movie, but Jeepers Creepers. Not the greatest movie, but a very fun horror film. I think that's a good example, at least for me, of dread, where these two characters are just extremely helpless. It almost feels like they're trapped in a nightmare, and that's what this movie did. It's just kicked up to 11 by the weird visuals and the music and the situations, the set pieces. The set pieces in this movie are insane. The school is crazy. Just the main hall with the blue velvet sort of walls, which is a great, we'll talk about that later in the movie, but then just the building itself, it's this bright red. The apartment building in the beginning of the movie is just with the stained glass, and just everything is just so strange and so foreign. Even like well, I'm getting ahead of myself now, but you can tell I'm a little bit excited about this movie. But yeah, just incredibly pervasive sort of feeling. There are, and I know, like I said, I don't really want to go through the plot too much. I know that I could do that, but I don't really want to summarize the movie, so to speak, because like that's been done so many times. But let's talk about scenes in this movie that I guess I found particularly um, amazing. One would be the whole sequence in which Sarah is um, pursued by our killer, so to speak, right? Um, we do learn that when Susie went to the school in the first shot, is that Sarah was the one that didn't let her in, and Pat was acting really weird before she died and everything like that, and she um, she left notes to her that she was going to show her. So they find out that her notes are missing. So so she starts kind of going, in this big chase sort of thing. And one thing, and it becomes obvious at this point in the film that the wine they said earlier for her to drink, for Susie to drink, is probably laced with something, so she's falling asleep and can't really help her. One thing when she starts to be chased, Sarah that is, that I thought was great was when the doors in this movie. And for one, I will say a little piece of trivia is that Argento, I think, originally wanted to cast kids. He wanted to be like a young school, of children, but they were like, we can't cast kids in this role. This movie's way too violent to do that. So they just went ahead and cast adults. But I don't think they mentioned their ages at all in this movie. So again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that they were literally intended to be children. And you do kind of see that through the way that the set is designed. Like the doors are very tall in this movie. The door handles are always like at eye level. They're not where they should be. So it makes kind of the perspective is always skewed a bit in this. Sometimes the floors have an elevation to them that is weird. Like they're going down a ramp or something. Is very the perspective is always very skewed and hard to grasp in this movie. And there was this one scene when she's kind of freaking out, Sarah is, and the door that conjoins Sarah and Susie's room, there's a little like piece of glass above it, like a little tiny window above it, and it lights up, meaning that somebody's in Sarah's room, and Sarah starts freaking out and running away, and that's when this big whole chase thing happens. I thought that was just so effective, it's just like another like really subtle, but like that's creepy, like you know that somebody horrible is after you, again playing into that nightmare feel, and seeing that light, just this light, again playing with color and light in this movie, flicking on, boom, that's all it takes. I mean, put yourself in her shoes, like boom, flip of a switch, really, right? Literally, terror, instant terror, because you know that the person that's gonna kill you is 5 feet away from you, separated by a small door, and she starts freaking out. I thought that was very chilling. One of my favorite parts of the movie, very subtle but very excellent. And then they get on this big chase. She runs up to the attic, and I didn't even talk about the maggot scene, but I didn't really. I like the maggot scene, but I didn't have much to say about it. Maggots fall from the ceiling and up into the attic, and there's tons of maggots. But she goes up to the attic, and then she kind of is being pursued by this assailant, and then she locks herself in a room where she finds a very small escape window, and she's putting up these blocks to, like chests and boxes and stuff to kind of get out of the room. And the killer, she's locked the door, and the killer put a knife through to try to get the lock open. Very good tension. You're like, I almost at a point was like, man, the guy's really struggling to get that door open, but it just was great tension. And then when she finally gets through the window, unfortunately, she doesn't look down and falls right into a pit of razor wire. I thought that was awesome. It reminded me kind of actually of Saw, the first movie, where they're crawling through the razor wire, and it actually reminded me of the second Saw, where the one character falls into the pit of like needles and everything. They saw that coming, but it kind of reminded me of that. And then she can't get out in time, so the killer slits her throat. Pretty crazy. And again, I didn't think that effect was very good, but it was like they don't shy away in this movie is definitely one good thing I could say. Like they don't ever, it's not like, oh, and then he slit her throat and they cut away. They will show it. They will show her throat opening up. They will show everything. I mean, like I said in the beginning of this movie, somebody gets their heart stabbed and we see it. It's a very visceral film, and it's not overly violent. I would say, I guess the things that are violent in this movie are extremely violent, but I don't think that it's pervasive throughout the film. So when we do see the violence, I think it has more of an impact. So that's pretty crazy. So then, of course, then it's when things start to get weird because, Sarah's like, oh, no, she ran away and everything like that. Susie knows that's not the case. So then we get to a scene that was probably my least favorite in the entire movie, and that's because it has one of what I would consider my least favorite sort of tropes in movies in general, which is exposition dumps, where we are given the plot of the movie basically laid out to us by a long monologue. Susie kind of like contacts one of Sarah's friends who is a psychologist or whatever, and he starts explaining about witches and everything, and then she meets one of the professors who's like an occultist professor one funny thing is they kind of pronounced occult really weird in this movie consistently. They said occult or I don't remember how they pronounced it, but they pronounced it like really weirdly. I'm like, is that the proper pronunciation, or was it just like a dubbing issue? I don't know. Oh, a cult, I think they called it something funny like that. And then he basically just explains, essentially the plot of the movie, what's going on. So I kind of like didn't like that because, like I said, I hate exposition dumps. And to be honest, that's what it was. He kind of explained about witches and everything and how they have to have like a matriarch or whatever to, once the matriarch is gone, like they lose all their power and everything like that. I forgive it though. I forgive it because of the rest of the movie. You know what I mean? He kind of explains like the school was originally made by this witch, Helena Marcos, who's kind of now an iconic sort of character and everything like that. So when Susie comes back, then the school is empty. And I love that feel where they kind of said, oh no, they went to this like, I think they went to go see a show or something, but it's like everybody's gone. It's like, what the hell? So now she's totally alone in this place. And now it's getting really creepy. The tension is like, the atmosphere is perfect here for the rest of the movie, really. And then she starts to kind of find out the rest of everything. Like she does find Pat's notes basically had numbers on them and everything like that, which were counting the steps that they were hearing at night, leading to the rooms and everything like that. And I didn't even mention in the beginning of the movie when Pat was screaming into the intercom and was saying something about an iris and a secret, and they couldn't hear because of the sound of the rain and everything. And that's kind of the mystery that we solve at the end, is that it had to do with Madame Blanc's room, her office or whatever, that we see many times. There's a blue iris on the wall, and that leads to a secret room. I kind of jumping around, like I said, but I'm kind of just describing my thoughts as I feel them. Then we get to basically the end of the movie where she goes into the secret room. You know she's going to see something fucked up. You know she's going to see all the teachers and everything doing some sort of witchcraft shit. And this was probably one of the best like tension moments in the movie for sure, but a really well done one, particularly. And I thought, I'm like, man, this director knows what he's doing, because she's going down this hallway very carefully. And for one, she goes through these blue velvet curtains, which of course matches to the blue velvet that we've seen earlier in the film and everything like that. So you kind of get that little throwback there. I thought that was cool. But the hallway that she goes down very slowly, remember, and everything is done very slowly and deliberately in this movie, was curved. I thought that was so smart and so deliberate. I thought that was a great way to build tension. She's going down this hallway, we know that she's going to get to the end. And when she gets to the end, she's going to see something bad she shouldn't have seen. But because the hallway is curved slightly, she can never see quite what's at the end of it. She has to continually move forward if she wants to see more. And us as the viewers are in the same boat as her. If we want to see more, we have to keep going with her. I thought that was just so beautiful. And when she finally gets to the end, perfect timing, she sees all of them in this room, and Madame Blanc is talking about how she's, wants to kill her and everything like that. And, it's like, oh, perfect timing. I thought that was kind of funny. But and then she kind of hides behind the curtains because, they kind of almost see her. And then her friend Sarah's dead body is right there with pins stuck in her eyes. You're like, holy shit. So then she keeps going and she finds this secret room where behind the curtain, which I didn't even mention again, behind earlier in the movie, they kind of, when they were sleeping in the ballet room or whatever, they kind of saw this curtain with this old wheezing kind of sound coming from behind it with a silhouette. And that's what she sees in here. And now we know it's Helena Marcos, who is the matriarch, if you will, of this witch coven. And she kind of talks to her and everything like that and taunts her. And she tries to attack her, but she disappears. And then Helena reanimates her friend's body, who comes in the room. And I was like, hell yes, when I saw this. I was like, this is awesome. This is good classic horror. Her friend's reanimated corpse with pins sticking out of the eyes, with this twisted, evil grin on her face, with her voice dubbed by the voice of Helena Marcos, raises, the knife or whatever. And I kind of wished it lasted a little bit longer, because it is pretty quick, because Susie rectifies this by actually stabbing, the disappearing image of Helena. And that basically destroys the whole covenant. The reanimated corpse disappears and everything. But that image of her friend was like awesome. I was like, Yes, that is great horror. I hope you guys agree with me on that one. I thought that was amazing. And then you actually get to see Helena's actual body, which is like they don't show you too much. It's very quick cuts. You see close-ups and you see, like very quick shots thing. But she looked. I really thought the design was really good here. I know in the remake, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I've seen the design of Helena in the remake, and I have to say this one is way cooler to me. Just like, old, supposed to be like extremely older than possible, but almost like zombie-like with the long claws and everything. Just really good. And then basically we're left with, because she died, all the witches lose their power and start dying, and the entire place explodes as Susie runs out, and then the entire place burns to the ground. And that's basically the end of the movie. So, yeah, um, I feel like I've kind of, to summarize, so to speak, I thought the main thing that I liked about this movie was the dread factor. Like I said, I've explained how I feel about dread and why I think it's one of my favorite things in horror movies. And I always look for movies that do it really well. I don't think it's done often. I think another movie that does it well, excuse me, is Hereditary. Like I said, I think Jeepers Creepers has a pretty good dread element to it. It's a little almost esoteric. I think that it's kind of a trope to some extent, but I don't think it's utilized as much as tension. Now these are kind of two terms. Tension obviously is a common thing, but I think the dread factor that I'm explaining, that I think I've over-explained, is a sort of thing that is almost, I don't know, maybe a term I've made up. Maybe there's another term for it. Maybe you could, tell me your thoughts in the comments, what you think about that. But that's normally the factor or the thought that like sticks with me the most in movies that I don't see a lot, and this movie just had it in spades, and that's why I liked it. The colors were amazing. I know I didn't talk about them a lot, but it's been done to death. I mean, just extremely amazing saturated colors. Sometimes the lighting was totally one color, lots of reds, and I know that red is talked about a lot in this movie because you do see a lot of red, but there were also like sequences where it was totally green, it was totally blue. Um, like for instance, speaking of the blue color, we get the blue color um, later at the end of the movie with the blue curtains, and then the main hall of the school is the blue velvet walls and everything like that. But in the beginning of the movie, when Pat goes to her friend and we know is being pursued by Helena, there's blue lighting, totally blue lighting in her friend's apartment to kind of like foreshadow her imminent death. I thought that was really cool, which I didn't understand at the time, but at the end of the movie, I was like, oh, very clever. So that's kind of why I said like the color is a bit of a character of itself in this movie. It speaks almost to us as the watchers of the film. That was really good. I loved this movie. I loved this movie. I thought it was fantastic. It was so extremely well done. I mean, horror movie that is just a piece of art, really, right? Like, I think my friend mentioned to me that people have said that this is the most beautiful horror movie ever made. Certainly that I've seen. Hell yes. Amazing. I will watch it again and again. It's the kind of movie where I'm going to go down the rabbit hole and all the trivia, and there's plenty of that. This is the first movie of a trilogy. I don't know what the third is called, but I know the sequel is called Inferno. Now, they're not like direct sequels, they don't share characters, but they're in the same universe, so I'm interested to check that out. I'm very interested to check out Argento's other films. I mean, if they're anything like this was amazing. I'm going to love them. I saw one called Opera from like '89 or something, if you guys have seen that one. That one looks really good, and then just others. And Giallo in general. I'm very interested to check out those other types of movies. So, like I said, there is a sequel to this movie that came out in 2018. I haven't seen it. I'm interested in seeing it. Uh, I know it's like very much more gory and a very different style than this movie. It doesn't have the extreme color sort of thing going on, which probably they were smart not to try to redo that. But I know it's like much more dark and violent. Though it does look like it has a good cast. Chloe Grace, I can't remember her last name. I think that was the girl that was in the Carrie remake. And Tilda Swinton, I think, is the head instructor, who I love Tilda Swinton. She's awesome in pretty much everything. So, yeah, so this was Suspiria. I hope that you enjoyed this podcast. I was a little bit rambly. I mean, not that I'm never not rambly, but especially with this one, I would say. But wow, I just had so much to say about it. I really had to get my thoughts out there. I always save music for last for some reason, a little tradition of mine. The music is super iconic in this movie. It's by a progressive rock band called Goblin. I love when bands do the soundtracks for movies. It's always a cool thing. The soundtrack was just perfect. I mean, I know it's been said to death, but again, I've never seen it. Uh, the main theme with the celeste and the mandolin and everything that plays constantly throughout the movie was just a very choice, I think. And then there was the other cue that played a lot where it was just like random screaming and shrieking and like just string noise and everything. I was like, oh, that's so perfect. It was so amazing. You know, like sometimes like in movies when you get crazy with the like atmospheric ambiance, sort of like shrieking strings and stuff, and like all that kind of atonal stuff that can get a little over the rails. I think in this movie it was like done so perfectly, where it was very creepy and very atmospheric, but it wasn't done to an extreme where it became like hokey. It was always perfect, and there was a lot of other really good cues. I'm gonna have to check if this one is on vinyl too. I'm sure it is, but yes, that the soundtrack was amazing. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. Next podcast will be on, I don't know, maybe I will do it on Freddy versus Jason, a little short one on that. That was fun. And I don't know. I do not know what I'm going to watch next. I'm like so into horror now with the Halloween season where I watched all these horror films. I'm like, I mean, I'm always into horror, but especially now I'm like really, really, it's becoming a huge hobby for me. So I don't know what I'm going to watch next, but I haven't actually seen Parasite, which is I don't remember the director's name. He's the South Korean guy. I think he's the guy that directed Snowpiercer. I'm like 99% sure of that. Um, yeah, that one Best Picture. Everybody's talked about that movie. I haven't seen it still, so I'd like to watch that. And I haven't seen the movie Midsummer. Um, well, I don't remember the director's name. He made Hereditary. I know some people said that wasn't very good, but I'm still very interested in watching that one. And then there's just tons of others. So, anyways, let me know what you've been watching. Let me know your thoughts on Suspiria if you've seen it. Let me know if you have any suggestions for me. I hope you're all very well. I hope that you're staying scared and watching great movies. This has been another fantastically fun podcast for me to make. And that's about it, folks. That's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed this. Have a great day and take care.